We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The footage the world has long trusted as proof of the moon landing isn't the pristine original you think it is. The true master tapes were erased, recycled, and lost forever. Now, new clips are going viral, and public confidence is trembling. This time, Congress has stepped in, demanding answers. If technology can sharpen decades-old footage, why can't we ever see the original in full? What truly survived, and what was lost, accidentally or by design? The reckoning begins with what comes next. Quick aside before we go full forensic. If you enjoy these deep dives where history meets bureaucracy and the internet catches fire, hit like if you're into it, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you're alerted whenever a new video drops. It's free, it takes a second, the algorithm loves engagement like it's oxygen, and it's genuinely the best way to support the work. Now, let's follow the paper trail. When the clip dropped on July 16th, it hit like a hammer. Sharper moon footage spread across the internet in hours. Headlines erupted, but the real shock came from Capitol Hill. Congressional staff drafted a formal letter to NASA's Office of Inspector General demanding answers. The language is clinical, the intent brutal. A full chain of custody accounting for every surviving Apollo 11 video asset, with dates, locations, personnel, and documentation. No summaries, no hand-waving. They cite public confusion, viral claims, and the enduring absence of the original source. They reference the 2009 NASA report, the 2019 auction, and NASA's own statements about erased telemetry tapes. The letter doesn't want explanations, it wants proof. Custody logs, paper trails, and a timeline that can be independently verified, including who authorized erasing the masters in the early 1980s. It also demands the storage history of every reel, from the Australian ground stations to Goddard to the Washington National Record Center, and finally to destruction or reuse. This isn't another press release request. It's a call for a forensic audit under public and congressional scrutiny. The stakes land in the subtext. If NASA cannot document the past, how can it claim to safeguard the future? The demand for answers is now a matter of public record. The next move belongs to the agency. Every time a new version of Apollo 11 footage appears online, the reaction is almost automatic. Headlines promise a breakthrough. Unseen moon landing video surfaces. NASA releases sharper Apollo 11. Restored moonwalk footage goes viral. The numbers spike. Millions of views in the first week. Comment sections fill with praise for the clarity. Then they spiral into the same questions. Is this finally the master? Where did this copy come from? Why does each release look a little different, but never perfect? The cycle repeats with every anniversary auction and digital remaster. I'm genuinely curious where you land on this part. Do you think Congress stepping in is overdue accountability or political theater riding a viral moment? Tell me in the comments. We really want to read your opinions, especially thoughtful, constructive ones. We try to read as many comments as possible, and when we can, we reply, or even pull the best perspectives into a future episode. In 2009, NASA restoration made national news, but the story did not end. Instead, every new upload reopens the argument. Viewers compare side-by-side frames, hunting for missing details, shadows, reflections, the sharpness of Armstrong's boot print. Some clips claim higher quality than ever, but they all come from the same pool. Broadcast conversions cleaned up and processed with modern software. The original signal, the one that captured the moon in raw clarity, remains out of reach. Technical forums and social media threads break down the limitations. Experts point out the chain. The signal left the lunar module, bounced to Australia, got converted for television, then recorded and re-recorded. Each step lost data. The best surviving tapes, like the Sydney pre-satellite copy or Houston's 2" reels, are still generations away from the original. Even the $230,000 Lowry digital restoration could only polish what was left. The result is always an improvement, but never a revelation. So, the hype around each new release does something unexpected. It does not settle the debate. It sharpens it. If technology can clean up decades-old video, why can it not recover the true master? Why does the most famous evidence in modern history exist only as a filtered copy? The more the footage circulates, the more the bottleneck stands out. And that bottleneck is not just technical. It is a credibility problem that will not fade with time. The camera on Apollo 11's lunar module did not send a standard television signal. It sent slow, scanned television SSDV 10 frames per 320 lines of resolution. A technical marvel not meant for living room TV. The signal landed first at ground stations Honeysuckle Creek, Parks, and Goldstone. Engineers captured the raw SSDV stream on one in magnetic tapes, spinning at 120 in pulse, preserving every bit the camera could deliver. Almost nobody ever saw that raw version. To get the moonwalk on television, the SSDV had to be converted live on the ground into a format broadcasters could use. The process was physical. A special RCA scan converter played the slow scan signal onto a phosphor screen. A fast scan camera refilmed that screen at 30 frames per, producing the NTSC signal for broadcast. The conversion chain introduced optical blur, lost vertical resolution, and added noise. The original 320 lines dropped to the equivalent of 240 lines or less. Fine detail, shadows, reflections, the texture of the lunar surface softened or vanished. The signal was then sent by microwave and satellite to Houston, recorded again on 2 inches videotape, and distributed around the world. Each step lost more clarity. Each copy moved further from the raw truth. Every broadcast, every surviving tape, every viral clip today comes from a signal that was already filtered and degraded before it reached the public. The original SSDV tapes, the first-generation masters, held the highest possible detail, the least distortion, the purest record of what the lunar camera saw. Those tapes were treated as routine telemetry, not as priceless evidence. When NASA ran short on magnetic tape in the early 1980s, the Apollo 11 reels were erased and reused. The best version was lost as standard procedure, not sabotage. What remains is a chain of conversions. The best surviving sources are broadcast derivatives, NTSC videotapes, Super 8 films of monitors, and a handful of pre-satellite Australian recordings. Even the Lowry digital restoration in 2009, which cost $230,000, could only enhance what was left. It was a copy of a copy, never the untouched original. Experts estimate up to half the vertical resolution vanished in a conversion. The signal-to-noise ratio dropped, and detail that modern tools might have recovered is gone for good. This is not just a technical footnote. It is a warning. The irreversible loss did not happen in space. It happened in the handoff when the raw evidence met the needs of broadcast and storage. The bottleneck was not a mystery. It was a chain of choices, and the consequences are permanent. 3 ground stations form the backbone of Apollo 11's live link to Earth. Goldstone in California, Honeysuckle Creek near Canberra, Parks in rural Australia. Each site captured the moon's signal as it arrived, raw and unfiltered, unlike anything the public would ever see. The reels themselves were heavy, wound with 1-inch magnetic tape. Spinning at 120 in pulse, engineers loaded the machines as the lunar module's camera beamed back Armstrong's first steps. Each station logged its own tapes labeled by mission, date, and sequence. But what happened next left a paper trail that fades just when it matters most. As soon as the broadcast wrapped, the reels were boxed and tagged for shipment. The Australian tapes, both from Honeysuckle Creek and Parks, traveled by air and sea, routed through customs and local carriers. Officially, they were destined for NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. Goldstone's tapes followed a similar path, moved by secure courier from the California desert to Goddard's tape vaults. Shipping manifests listed reel counts and crate numbers, but the documentation was routine, not forensic. The tapes were treated as just another telemetry asset, not as irreplaceable historical evidence. Records from 1969 show that NASA's Data Services Division received the shipments, logged the arrivals, and stored the boxes in temperature-controlled rooms. No special designation marked the Apollo 11 reels as different from weather satellite tapes or deep space probes. The tapes sat in racks alongside thousands of others, each with a code, a date, and a purpose that would fade over time. By the early 1970s, the Washington National Records Center in Sutland became the next stop. Pallets of tapes were transferred for long-term storage with accession logs noting bulk transfers, but rarely listing individual reels by serial number. The chain of custody stretched across continents and agencies, but the finer details, who signed for what and which crate held which tape, were lost in the shuffle of routine. The official NASA reports from 2009 confirm the broad outlines. About 15 reels from each ground station, roughly 45 in total, were shipped, received, and archived. But no surviving paperwork tracks the tapes reel by reel from the moment they left Australia to the shelves at Goddard or from Goddard to the record center. The physical movement is clear in theory, but the audit trail is patchy. For every box that arrived, there's a gap in the record, a missing signature, a vanished receipt, a crate that was logged by batch, not by content. This is where the story edges from logistics to uncertainty. The tapes passed through hands, warehouses, and agencies, but the documentation thinned out just as the stakes rose. The transfer from field to archive was supposed to preserve the evidence. Instead, it created a gap, a break in the chain that still haunts the official record. Dick Navcare spent 3 years searching for the answer everyone wanted. He was the engineer responsible for Apollo's television signals, the man who knew the system from camera to broadcast. By 2006, rumors about missing tapes had grown too loud to ignore. NASA assigned Nava to lead a formal hunt for the original Apollo 11 slow scan tapes. He gathered a team of retired engineers, archivists, and contractors. They traced every possible lead: internal memos, shipping logs, warehouse inventories, and private collections. The work was methodical, not romantic. Phone calls to storage sites, boxes opened in government basement, cross-checks against old mission logs. The findings landed with the weight of a bad verdict. The original slow scan masters, about 45 reels recorded at Goldstone, Honeysuckle Creek, and Parks, were gone. Not stolen, not hidden, erased. Sometime in the early 1980s, NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center faced a shortage of magnetic tape. The policy was blunt: reuse what you can. Apollo 11's telemetry reels, once loaded with the purest signal from the moon, were stripped and recycled for newer missions. No ceremony, no warning, just a routine act in an era that saw tapes as tools, not artifacts. Nava's report spelled out the reality. The inescapable conclusion was that about 45 tapes were erased and reused. NASA's own archivist, David Williams, confirmed it. There was no single sign-off, no villain. It was procedure. Decisions made by program managers who believed the broadcast copies were good enough. The erased reels included not just video, but all telemetry, data, voice, and the raw SSDV stream. Once wiped, nothing could bring them back. The loss was not mysterious. It was bureaucratic. Tape was expensive. Storage was limited. Every reel took up shelf space that new emissions needed. Contracts with outside vendors, RCA among them, outlined a recycling process that covered not just Apollo, but weather satellites, planetary probes, and deep space missions. The Apollo 11 tapes were caught in the middle. Valuable in hindsight, expendable at the time. For the restoration teams decades later, the consequences were immediate. No matter how advanced the software or careful the process, they were working from copies of copies. The best surviving sources, NTSC broadcast tapes, Super 8 films of monitors, and Australian pre-satellite recordings, were all one or more generations removed from the original. The chain of custody was broken not by theft or sabotage, but by a routine that treated world-changing evidence as just another expendable asset. NAVCA's conclusion closed the door on hope for a pristine master. The highest quality record of humanity's first steps on the moon had been wiped, overwritten, and lost to standard procedure. Larry Digital's name carried weight in Hollywood. The company had restored classics like Casablanca and Star Wars, pulling detail and depth from decades-old film. But when NASA called in 2009, the assignment was different. The Apollo 11 tapes were not cinematic negatives. They were battered broadcast copies already stripped of their best information long before anyone thought about digital rescue. Mike and Chillick, Lowry's president, sized up the job. The budget was $230,000. The source was a patchwork of NTSC videotapes, Super 8 films shot off monitors, and a handful of Australian recordings. The goal was clear: recover every usable frame, sharpen every shadow, and bring the moonwalk as close to the original as possible. And Chillick set expectations from the start. In his own words, this was by far and away the lowest quality material the company had ever handled. The challenge was not creative. It was forensic. Every fix had a ceiling. Lowry's engineers scanned each tape at the highest possible resolution. They ran digital filters to reduce noise, stabilize flicker, and correct phase errors that blurred faces and equipment. Algorithms isolated the lunar module's edges, teased out contrast from the grain, and tried to reclaim the lost sharpness of Armstrong's first step. But the process could only work with what survived. The original slow, scanned signal with its 320 lines of vertical detail was already gone, flattened in the live conversion, and then blurred again by analog duplication. The surviving tapes held maybe half the resolution of the original. Some scenes were so degraded that no amount of software could restore the fine texture of the lunar surface or the crisp edge of a boot print. The restoration team faced choices with every frame. Remove too much noise and details vanished. Push the contrast and ghostly artifacts appeared. Ghosts from the conversion chain, not the moon. Inchylik's team decided to preserve every defect they could not confidently fix. Reflections, monitor glare, sync lines stayed in. The result was sharper, steadier, and more watchable than any previous release, but it was still a copy of a copy. The moonwalk remained filtered through the same bottleneck that erased the master. Public reaction was enthusiastic. Headlines praised the newly restored footage, and anniversary specials played side-by-side comparisons. But Inchylik was blunt in interviews. The restoration could only go so far. Without the original SSDV tapes, the ceiling was set. The best technology in the world could not bring back detail that never made it onto the surviving reels. The missing master haunted every frame, a limit that no amount of money, software, or expertise could break. On July 20th, 2019, 3 reels of Apollo 11 videotape went to auction at Schurz. Bidding started high. It ended at $1.82 million. The seller, Gary George, a former NASA intern, had picked them up decades earlier at a government surplus sale, thinking they were nothing special. The auction house called them the earliest, sharpest surviving video of the moon landing. Headlines treated it like a revelation. Collectors called it a piece of history, but the fine print told a different story. These were not the legendary Lost Master. They were Houston's 2-inch broadcast tapes already generations removed from the original slow scan feed. NASA issued a public statement within hours. The agency said the auction tapes contain no material that has not been preserved in its archives. The agency reminded reporters that the raw telemetry reels, the real prize, were erased in the early 1980s. What sold for $1.82 million was a relic, not a revelation. Still, the sale hit a nerve. Comment sections filled with accusations. Some said cover-up, others said cash grab. If NASA had duplicates, why let a private owner profit? If these tapes were not unique, why did the market treat them like gold? People demanded to know who tracked the originals, who signed off on their destruction, and why the best evidence ended up as auction bait. The story moved from the science desk to the opinion page in a single news cycle. NASA tried to close the case. Press releases stressed that every second of Apollo 11's televised moonwalk was already available to the public. The agency pointed to previous restorations, the 2009 Lowry Digital Project, and the full set of surviving NTSC tapes in its archives. But the market did not care about technicalities. The buyer wanted a piece of the myth. The public wanted the master. And the more NASA insisted nothing was missing, the more people suspected something. So the 2019 auction did not solve the trust problem. It made it worse. The price tag became a symbol of what was lost, of what cannot be replaced, and of the gap between official messaging and public belief. Every news sale, every viral headline resets the argument. If the best proof is gone, who decides what counts as evidence? The answer, once again, is up for grabs. In 2009, a new set of images arrived from lunar orbit. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, known as LRO, swept over the Apollo 11 site with a camera that could spot objects the size of a desk from 50 kilometers up. The first public release showed the descent stage of Eagle casting a sharp shadow on the Sea of Tranquility. Faint lines traced outward, paths where astronauts walked. Equipment dragged, dust disturbed. The marks matched the old mission maps down to the meter. For the first time since 1969, there was independent, high-resolution proof. Something built by humans still sat on the moon exactly where the records said it should be. The LRO images did not depend on broadcast chains, magnetic tape, or the fog of old paperwork. The data came from a modern spacecraft using digital sensors stored in redundant archives and released by a new generation of NASA engineers. No conversion, no generational loss. The physical evidence was there. Hardware tracks the unmistakable geometry of a landing site. These pictures did not answer every question about the moon landings, but they closed the door on one branch of doubt. The hardware survived. The mission happened. The surface tells its own story. But the reality on the ground did not erase the problem with the record. The LRO photos proved that people had been there, but they did not recover the missing signal. The raw, unfiltered video that captured the moment itself. The debate split. For some, the orbital images were the final word, the ultimate rebuttal to decades of suspicion. For others, they raised a new question. If the physical proof is now public, why does the best visual evidence remain lost? Why is the cleanest, most direct record, the thing millions watched live, still filtered through generations of conversion and decay? The LRO mission offered clarity on one level and left a gap on another. The moon's surface holds the evidence, but the chain of custody for the footage remains broken. The conversation shifts. It is no longer about whether the event occurred, but why the record we trust most, the moving image, remains incomplete. Official statements from NASA read like a checklist. No footage is missing. All content was preserved. The public has access to every second of the moonwalk. The words are precise, almost rehearsed, but the public conversation moves in a different direction. Every headline about a new restoration, every viral auction, every anniversary release sharpens the same doubt. If nothing is missing, why does the best version no longer exist? NASA's Johnson Space Center, which holds the surviving tapes, points to archived NTSC copies, digital files, and meticulous logs of what is available. Press releases say the original slow scan signal was. And as we close this out, if you want more investigations like this, the kind where the evidence is real but the story is messy, do the simple free thing that helps the most, like the video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what we publish next. And if you know someone who still argues about Apollo in 2026, share this with them, because the real mystery isn't the moon, it's what happened to the tape.